Good afternoon. I'm Bill Delahunt, and I'm going to be out of a job shortly. That was meant to be funny, I don't know. But there will be a vote that will be coming shortly. And, well, let me first begin by thanking everyone for coming out here on a lovely Sunday afternoon. And I particularly want to thank our panelists. David Swanson. David, would you raise your hand? Chris Hellman. Chris. Tom Barfield and Joe Wipple. I want to thank them for taking this afternoon as well and consenting to participate in this forum. And I also want to acknowledge Cape Codders for Peace and Justice. Who have consistently been a clear and constant voice on this issue, as well as on the war in Iraq and on the occupation of both Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, in the case of Iraq, we found ourselves frequently in agreement. In fact, it was this very venue, right here in this auditorium, almost 8 years ago, that I announced I would vote against the resolution authorizing the invasion of Iraq. I remember that oh so well. And I'm also proud to say that I then proceeded to mobilize some 126 of my colleagues, all of them were Democrats, to vote against the resolution. I was co-founder of both the Out of Iraq Caucus and Iraq Watch, the latter of which was an effort to bring attention and accountability to the conduct of the war and occupation in Iraq. Oversight, if you will. Well, we're here today because, as I alluded to, in the not-too-distant future, the House will be asked to vote on what is known as supplemental funding for the war in Afghanistan, in the neighborhood of some 33 billion for both military operations, that's about 30 billion, and reconstruction efforts, which is a bit in excess of 2 billion. As I indicated to the representatives of the Cape Codders for Peace and Justice recently, I have not yet made a decision how I'm going to vote. And I don't intend to announce that today. But as I indicated to Diane Turco, I will announce that decision in the not-too-distant future and far in advance of the actual vote, so that you can call me and ask me to change my mind, or you can call me and say, you know, why don't you convince some of your colleagues to vote similarly?
Yeah, that's okay.
I believe there were, and are many differences between the war and the occupations in Afghanistan and Iraq. But it is indisputable that the situation in Afghanistan has become much more difficult and complicated, in large part because of the distraction of Iraq. The early efforts in Afghanistan, if they were allowed to be pursued, might have resulted in a very different outcome than the situation we currently face today. While surveys indicate that while the Taliban remain deeply unpopular in Afghanistan, the image of the United States has also deteriorated sharply. And the Karzai government appears to have lost much of what support they might have had from the Afghan people. And meanwhile, the publics among our NATO allies are demanding withdrawal in or force reduction.
That's right.
And Al-Qaeda has retreated into Pakistan and metastasized in other countries such as Somalia and Yemen. Now, I too have little faith in the Afghan government as a party. The rampant fraud in the recent presidential election last August was profoundly disturbing, as was President Karzai's attempt to bring the electoral complaint boards, those who exposed the fraud, under his control. And then to have Ahmed Karzai allege that the UN in the EU and other Western embassies were behind the fraud really shattered his credibility, in my opinion. Furthermore, there is a consensus that many in his government are involved in drug trafficking. It's no secret that 95% of the world's heroin originates in Afghanistan. And Transparency International, a respected watchdog group, says that Afghanistan is the second most corrupt country on earth, the second, after Somalia, which of course doesn't have a government. Well, to top it all off, it's claimed that Karzai made the statement that he was prepared to join the Taliban. If that's true, then no more needs to be said about our so-called partner in Kabul. On the other hand, we tend to forget the reign of the Taliban and what the Taliban did to women when they were in power. By any standard, it was barbaric. So the question is, what happens if they return to it? So, as I said, I'm listening to multiple viewpoints, and that's why I'm pleased to have this excellent and distinguished panel here today, because they each bring a different perspective to the discourse. So before I introduce them, and I'll do that forthwith, I want to outline the format of today's event. I will ask each of our speakers to make a good faith effort to limit their remarks to 7-8 minutes. After their presentations, we'll have a question and answer period. I ask that you raise your hands. I will call on you, and then my chief of staff, Mark Forrest, where is he? Waiting. That's what you need a chief of staff for. He's running for office. See what happens to him. And he will go and hold the mic, and you can pose your question. Now, I know that many in this room have very strong and passionate feelings about this issue, and I respect them. But I would ask you to give as many people an opportunity to respond to your questions. And please, please make them questions. We're all here to learn. We're all here to hear these disparate views. And I have no doubt that everyone will be treated with courtesy and respect. Because really, if we're going to have public discourse, even on issues where people are appropriately have strong feelings and are passionate about it. It's important that as well as rendering our own opinions, that we listen to the views of others. Now, as I said, I'm going to introduce our panel. They all have very lengthy and impressive resumes, which I will shorten. But again, I do want to express my gratitude to them. First is, to my right, is David Swanson. He is the author of Daybreak, Undoing the Imperial Presidency and Forming a More Perfect Union. He holds a master's degree in philosophy from the University of Virginia. He has worked as a newspaper reporter and as a communication director with jobs including press secretary for my friend and colleague Dennis Kucinich, 2004 presidential campaign. He is co-founder of the AfterDowningStreet.org, which I presume referred to the Downing Street memo. I haven't had a chance yet to go on. Creator of Convict. I don't want to say it. ConvictBushCheney.org and Washington Director of Democrats.com and Voters for Peace, convener of the Legislative Working Group of United for Peace and Justice, and chair of the Accountability and Prosecution Working Group of United for Peace and Justice. Next is Chris Hellman of the National Priorities Project. He joined the project after serving as a military policy analyst for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. He spent 6 years as a senior research analyst at the Center for Defense Information. He also worked for 2 years as a military budget specialist at Physicians for Social Responsibility. Previously, he spent 10 years on Capitol Hill as a congressional staffer, working on national security and foreign policy issues. Most importantly, he holds a bachelor's degree from an outstanding Ivy College up in Vermont called Middlebury, where I also graduated a few years ahead of me. Next we have Tom Barfield, a professor on the anthropology faculty of Boston University. His research focuses on problems of reconstruction and political development in contemporary Afghanistan. He has conducted extensive field work in Afghanistan, as well as shorter periods of research in Xinjiang, China, and post-Soviet Uzbekistan. Among other books, he has written The Central Asian Arabs of Afghanistan in 1981. He is a co-author of Afghanistan, an Atlas of Indigenous Domestic Architecture, 1991, and has a new book coming out called Political Legitimacy in the Land of the Hindu Kush, Ruling Afghanistan from 1500 to 2010. He is also director of the Institute for the Study of Muslim Societies and Civilization, and most significantly for today's discussion, is president of the American Institute for Afghanistan Studies. Ron? And finally, but certainly not least, we have Joe Wipple, who is the director of the Center for International Relations at Boston University. He is a former Central Intelligence Agency officer and spent 30 years as an operation officer in the National Clandestine Service. He has served overseas in Bonn, West Germany, Guatemala City, Luxembourg, Madrid, Spain, Mexico City, Vienna, Austria, and Berlin, Germany. He has also held numerous assignments at CIA headquarters, including that of Director of Congressional Affairs. Now, I'm going to begin by turning over for his presentation to David Swanson.